Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and I'm going to Montreal today and see an old friend. We're going to have a chat. Abraham Weisfeld and I are going to talk about Israel and Palestine, actually, because he lives about half of each year in Montreal, and the other half, normally, he is in Palestine in a town called Nablus. Now, this is always surprises people because Abraham Weisfeld, as the name might suggest, is Jewish. And not very many Jewish Canadian activists live half of their lives every year in Palestine. So people get a little bit surprised about that. But Abe is he was brought up to be non Zionist. And so he's got a real feeling for that part of the world. But this year he wasn't able to go because of the COVID situation. So he's housebound and I'm housebound and we're still having a good time. Good morning, Abby. How are you?
Not too bad. Very well. In your presence, I feel very well.
How sweet of you. All right. Let's get down to talking about Israel because I hardly ever have a conversation with you about anything except Israel and Palestine. It's always the big issue in your life and what you normally do with your life. So you're not there this year, but today, as it happens, is the International Day for the Remembrance of the Holocaust, or something with that similar title, and that is a very meaningful day to you, right?
Yes, I was brought up very Jewish. Both my parents are refugees from the Holocaust. They didn't go through the worst of it, in the death camps or as slave labor, or in the German munitions factories or anything like that, like my aunt was. But they escaped because they were, I guess, in the case of my mother, politically conscious. She is a Jewish Bundist, which was the Jewish movement, which was the most prominent of the Jewish political parties before the Holocaust, which was an anti-Zionist organization.
And well, you're going to have to explain a lot about the Bundes because even though you've told me about it, it was sort of new to me when you first broached the subject. And I bet there are very few people nowadays who've even heard the term.
Yes, that's because, most of the Jewish Bundists were, massacred by the Nazis during the Holocaust. And which was 3 million in Poland, about 80% of whom were voting for the Jewish Bundist Party in the last municipal elections for the Jewish Municipal Council. And this is a movement started in 1897, same year as the Zionist movement, which sought to achieve Jewish security and what's called self-determination in the countries which the Jewish people considered to be their homeland. Like my parents' families, considered Poland to be their homeland, and so my mother's movement, the Jewish Bund, which means alliance, mainly a working class organization, socialist, of course, sought to achieve a national cultural autonomy. That was the program of the Jewish Bund, and that was the way to solve the so-called Jewish question, as Marx.
Hold on. Let's, because that's already going to be puzzling to other people, as indeed a little bit to me. National autonomy,
cultural autonomy,
but cultural autonomy, but within whatever country they lived in, not Israel. I mean, that's there right. Wasn't Israel, but not in the Middle East at all, right?
Yes.
How could you have cultural autonomy in Poland, say?
Well, it means that we have a right to cultural institutions like synagogues, which were closed down in the USSR, actually. Right to have representation, self-representation within a Jewish government, an internal Jewish government for Jewish people. The right to, all the cultural attributes like kosher food, which didn't exist in the USSR, which is one reason that my grandmother gave for not leaving the Warsaw Ghetto to go to the USSR. and she ended up starving to death in the ghetto. So, all of these things are very important, to the Jewish people.
Now, hold on. This is really the whole idea that you could have a government, sort of a self-governing political entity, though. These were people who wanted to have political independence within the state that is not Jewish.
Yes, but it's not independence, it's autonomy. Autonomy is a constitutional formula found in the theory of federalism. It's something that has come up, with respect to, let's say, the Kurdish nation within Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. They're a people, a nationality within each of their homelands, but they are a nation, in the international sense, international with a hyphen. And so they ask for autonomy within the constitutional apparatus of each of the countries in which they are living. And then they would have a federation amongst each of their various autonomies. The same thing with respect to the Jewish people. There are various Jewish political tendencies which reflect this sentiment. For instance, we have the Jewish Bund, which was calling for national cultural autonomy. Then there was the Jewish Autonomous Movement, which established the World Jewish Congress. Then there was the Territorialists, who wanted to set up a territory, and their founder, Zingville, called for a land without a people for a people without a land. And this slogan was taken by the Zionists to refer to Palestine, even though there was another people living in the land. So, there's been various programs that have been proposed, to solve the Jewish question, as Marx put it.
That's a loaded phrase, obviously. But let me ask, the only thing that I've ever heard of that would sound sort of like what you're talking about, and maybe the question is it really like what you're talking about, was the system that was in the Ottoman Empire, I believe, called the millet system. And they had, as I understand it, a lot of different ethnicities would live even, cheek by jowl, sort of in the same towns and everything. They would all be there. They'd bump into each other in the street, but they had each ethnic group, or I don't know whether you call them ethnic, but whatever they were, each population would have its own kind of government, and I guess their own laws. So they would be a person would have to be accountable to one or another of these communities, but they I gather, worked. There's another similarity that I've heard of it in India, where I don't know whether it's still true. I think they've been talking about changing the family law, but for a while anyway, and maybe still, if you were Muslim, the family law that was for Muslims would apply to you, and if you were Hindu, it would be a different set of laws that would apply to Hindu families, etc.
Well,
maybe other ethnic groups, I don't know, but that the laws would be particular to each separate community, which means, of course, you have to decide what you are. And if you wanted to change or marry somebody in the other group or something, I guess it would be kind of confusing. But at any rate, theoretically, that could work, but it couldn't work for a lot of things like, foreign policy, or how much to charge for the sewers this year, making decisions that were for a whole territory, who's going to pay to have the potholes fixed, or something like that. You couldn't do that.
Yes, no. Jewish Bundist autonomy refers to an internal self-governing apparatus, yes, but it's not the same as the millet system in the Ottoman Empire, because the millet system established a caste system of social orders for each of two nationalities. Those two were the Jewish nationality and the Christian nationality, in Egypt called the Copts. Now, each of these two were relegated to the millet system, in which they had to pay us a special tax for the protection of the state, supposedly. And two, they were not allowed to become members of the military. it was called exemption from military service, but actually it was an exclusion from military service because each of these nationalities were not allowed to defend themselves. They were supposed to be defended by the state, by the caliphate, you know. But
okay, now the state was presumably Muslim.
yes,
And these exceptions were Christians and Jews.
yes.
Were there any others? Were there Hindu millets?
No.
Or, no.
Although there were other nationalities, you know, for instance, in the Maghreb, in the Northern African countries, you know, with Islamic states, there were other nationalities, of course, who were indigenous to the region. Berbers, Kabyle, you know, who had their own languages, which were banned, but they weren't allowed any sense of autonomy. They were forcibly assimilated, which didn't work, and they still exist today, and it's still an outstanding issue in Algeria today, for example, and in Libya and Tunisia. I don't know, but I presume that it would be the same case. But you know, the mill system, you know, was a degradation. It was a system of oppression. It wasn't a system of liberation for the nationalities. So,
well, okay, I'll take your word for it, except I won't completely, because what I read about it described it as kind of a workable system in which at least these people had quite a bit of autonomy with it, you know, self-governance, each population. And I don't know how much abused they were, but I you know, the only things I read about it make it sound almost attractive. I mean,
compared to Europe, yes, it was. You know, there were no systematic massacres of the Jewish people. The synagogues were allowed to flourish in Jerba, an island off of Tunisia. There was a Jewish community which was rather autonomous and contiguous, but you know, there were massacres that took place nonetheless. You know, at certain times when the Jewish people were associated with any colonial enterprise that had taken over and occupied the country. And like France provided for French citizenship to the Jewish Algerians and used them in the administrative apparatus, you know, of the colonial state. And so there was a certain resentment, you know, that was focused in on the Jewish Algerians, which was unfortunate. And you know, so many of the Jewish people left Algeria to go and live in France as a result, together with the fascists who left at the same time. So it wasn't, you know, entirely successful, although it was stable for a pretty long period of time. So the Jewish Bund, you know, was proposing national cultural autonomy with self-regulation in the countries of residence, which the Jewish people considered to be their homeland. And they didn't seek to, you know, like leave their homelands and give up the fight against fascism and chauvinism. So the Jewish Bund was a Jewish liberation movement that sought to do away with fascism by bringing in socialism and by bringing in the autonomy of the Jewish people. Now, I was educated in this manner by my mother. I was raised Orthodox. I was raised very Jewish, you know, in the traditional sense. My father was Orthodox socialist, but not a Bundist, because he came from a less cosmopolitan city in the south of France, in the south of Poland. In fact, he came from a little town outside of Lublin called Bianca. And his father was a chassid, you know, with the pious and the black clothes and everything like that. So, you know, like my Jewish upbringing teaches me not to be a Zionist, whereas, you know, most Jewish people were raised to be Zionists, you know, because the Jewish educational system in Israel educated the Jewish people only in Zionist history and not in Jewish history.
But hold on, your father wasn't a Zionist either, even though he wasn't a Bundist. So
That's
there
right.
were non-Zionists, Bundists too.
Yes.
Okay, what was that all about? Were there whole traditions or were there sects of Judaism, or what
No.
kind of people were non-Buddhist, non-Bundist, non-Zionists?
Yes. All of the Judaic Jewish people, that is, the Orthodox Jewish people, were non-Zionist. All of them. Because Zionism began as an anti-religious movement, because they considered that Judaism was self-defeating because it was asking Jewish people to wait for the Messiah, and was not, you know, Orthodox Judaism didn't have a program to deal with, anti-Semitism and fascism. And then
Okay,
the
so
Zionists,
hold on. So now that explains something to me, I think, because I've been puzzled by the fact that a lot of the very Orthodox Jews in Israel are sort of non-Israeli or something. And maybe that is because of their non-Zionist tradition.
that's right. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, because they're traditional rabbis to which they continue to follow a respectful tradition of following their teachings by means of their writings are non-Zionist. Even those who participate in the Netanyahu government. The Shas party, which is religious, Orthodox, conservative, and part of the government of Netanyahu, is non-Zionist nonetheless. And their members, live in Jerusalem only, not in Tel Aviv. And they don't, and they refused to allow their children to be conscripted into the army. That's why there's been a number of confrontations over the past year when the Netanyahu government tried to bring in a conscription law, because a lot of secular Israelis resent the exemption from military service by the Hasids, the Orthodox, because their children don't have to lose 3 years or 2 years of their life, to the military conscription. And so they wanted to impose conscription on the Orthodox because they were Zionists, and the Orthodox were not. So,
but how's that going? And by the way, first, the question occurs to me: if these super Orthodox people are sort of non-Israeli, does that make them any friendlier to the Palestinians?
Not necessarily.
No.
No, because it's sort of a particularist, like self-serving, ideology that they've turned Judaism into in order to promote Judaism of, outside of Zionism. And so they only they consider Zionism to be a horse, to be a donkey on which they are riding to their own, preconceived goals. Okay? Plus the state, provides them with subsidies to maintain their, social security. So they cooperate with the Zionist state to that extent, but they do not consider Israel to be Jewish. Neither do I, from a Jewish perspective, even though Israel calls itself Jewish.
This is really cute. I love the idea. Israel is not Jewish. That sounds like a good placard to carry around the street to see.
That's precisely what the Neturei Karta sect does.
What?
Yes, the Neturei Karta are a group of Orthodox Jews who live in Jerusalem and elsewhere, who carry signs at Palestinian demonstrations saying that Israel is not Jewish, and that they call for the dismantlement of the Zionist state.
Okay.
So it all sort of fits together if you know all the pieces, But, most Jewish people are not educated, to these other sort of facets of the Jewish political culture, because they're only taught, a Zionist political history, and is a copy of the Israel educational system. And that's even in the Jewish school system in North America. Except
but now, before Israel was formed, I don't know what would have been the distribution of these groups within Judaism as a whole? I've always assumed that Zionists quickly became the predominant movement because they won. They got Israel, right? So they must have been numerically stronger than either the Bundes group or these Orthodox Israel is not Jewish groups.
Not necessarily.
No.
Before the Holocaust, the Zionists had 8% support amongst the Jewish communities. 8%.
All right, but when did Zionism begin anyway? I know the answer, but I can't remember it.
Okay, well, all the Jewish Bundes members, in Europe were killed off. So after the Holocaust, they weren't around. And the Zionists, had a proportionally, heavier representation in Jewish people.
Why would the Bundes have been killed more than other people?
Because the Bundes membership was in Europe, Eastern Europe, and that's where the Jewish people were killed. So the Bundists weren't around afterwards. Secondly, the Zionists had support from various state actors. Britain, even though they at one point had a white paper that was favoring the Palestinians, nonetheless, the British military occupation in Palestine favored the Zionist militia and provided them with arms and with training. The Soviet Union also provided the Zionists with arms from Czechoslovakia and voted in favor of the recognition of the Zionist state. Even their vote would have made all the difference. Without that vote, Israel would not have been recognized by the United Nations General Assembly.
Is there a particular ideological reason why all these states lined up in favor of Zionism rather than Buddhism, if there is such a word as Buddhism? Because it would seem logical to me that they would have preferred the outfit that claimed we should stay here and be Polish or American or Russian or whatever.
Well, of the Jewish survivors, together with the refugees that came out of the Soviet Union, like my parents, it comprised about 500,000. So all of the states in the world were not interested in receiving Jewish refugees. The United States, because the Jewish refugees were socialists, and Canada and Australia, all the British Commonwealth, refused Jewish refugees unless they were sponsored by a member of their family who were already a citizen of that country. And so they couldn't turn them down, like my father's sister sponsored us to come to Canada. And that comprised 52% of the Jewish refugees. 48% of the Jewish refugees couldn't get a visa to go to any other country. 2, there was no proposition to set up a Jewish autonomous territory in Germany at the time around the refugee camps, which is theoretically possible, but it wasn't, proposed by anybody, not even the Jewish refugees. It was inconceivable because it was considered to be, a non sequitur, because, they knew that no country in Europe would accept a Jewish territory. So they didn't even propose it. So these 48% of the Jewish refugees couldn't get a visa to go anywhere else. And so where were they going to go? So the Zionists came in and said, come with us and we'll give you a home to live in. Yeah, a home that used to belong to a Palestinian. And so the 48% who were not Zionists ended up going to Palestine anyways, because they had nowhere else to go. And then their children were indoctrinated to become Zionists thereafter, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right, that helps. Yeah, I feel better already now that I know all this. Tell me now about what the hell's going on over there now. If we can move to talking about the current drama in Israel, because as of right now, I think yesterday Netanyahu was asked again to form a government, and he'd been trying time after time and screwing it up. What's the story over there?
Okay, so the president, Rivlin, who's a member of the Likud party of Netanyahu, has asked Netanyahu to form a government, but he most likely will not be able to do so. He only has like 54 seats, and a majority is 61 seats to form a government in a coalition. Now, what's more interesting in this election than any other election is that the results have produced 2 Palestinian parties that have significant number of seats that are needed to form a coalition with in order to form a majority. So the Palestinian parties have never previously been allowed to participate in a coalition government. But now they hold in their hands the majority. Now, the left-wing coalition of Palestinian parties, the Joint List, have about 7 seats. And the conservative, Palestinian party, which is Islamic, has 5 seats. So the 2 sides, of the right and left amongst the Israeli parties are trying to maneuver to get the support of the Ram Islamic Palestinian Party, but without providing them with a seat in the cabinet, which would be, catastrophic for this Zionist mentality in Israel. So they're trying to.
I'm sorry, it would be catastrophic if they got if a Palestinian had a seat in the cabinet.
Yes, because then their coalition would be considered non-legitimate by a significant proportion of the population, and they wouldn't and they wouldn't follow the government anymore. They would they would rebel. They would try to stop a coup d'état or something.
This is really, you have to be Jewish to be a legitimate member of the government.
Yes, because they've been indoctrinated to believe that Israel is a Jewish state. So therefore, you can only have Jewish parties in the government, logically, as a result of the nation state law. So what to do with 20% of the population who are Palestinian, who voted for Palestinian parties, and who now have 11 seats in the parliament, in the Knesset. So they're in a quandary. And now they've had the fourth election because of this phenomenon.
Oh, so this has been going on a while.
This is the fourth election in the last 2 years.
But I know, but I didn't know that was part of it. That the position of the Palestinians was a significant reason why they keep getting, and they have more and more elections. They can't solve it.
Of course not. The Zionists will not admit this. It's a neurotic political mentality in which they cannot, recognize the actuality of what Israel is. Israel is a a binational, entity. 20% of the population is significant. Here in Canada, the Jewish population is 5% of the population. No, sorry, 3% of the population. United States, 1.5% of the population. In Israel, the Palestinians are 20% of the population, and they vote.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
why you are smiling and I am smiling. I mean, it's kind of significant, isn't it, that both of us find this entertaining and enjoyable. That I guess it's because I've come to think that almost everything that Israel does as a state is wrong-headed. So let's see if, I don't know what the Palestinians would do if they were actually running the government, but it sounds like a fun idea.
Ram, the leader of Ram, whose name is Abbas, the same as the prime minister of the Palestinian Authority, he went on Israel television. All three major television networks had him present his speech, because he was the key to whether or not there was going to be a coalition government formed with his tacit support. And, the major media were willing to sort of, legitimatize this concept because he was from a conservative Palestinian political party. And so, they could conceive of, this conservative Palestinian political party being in the government and being in tacit support of a conservative government, of Israel. So it seemed, to
but
fit.
Likud is a conservative government, right?
Yes. Yes.
So why isn't that a successful idea then?
Because the supporters of the conservative Likud party would not accept a Palestinian party that would give tacit support to form a majority. Because, of course, they would extract concessions for Social Security for the Palestinian citizens, for police protection. Because in the northeast of Israel, the Palestinian villages were left to remain there because they were more Christian than they were Muslim. And the initial founders of Israel didn't want to antagonize the Christian countries that were supporting them by expelling the Christians, because they wouldn't be able to explain that, to their Christian populations.
All right. Now, so what's going to happen?
Well, if nothing happens, then there will be a fifth election, in which case, the same scenario will probably be repeating itself. But by that time, perhaps Netanyahu will have been, he's on trial for corruption.
I know.
So at one
point, they couldn't put Trump on trial while he was president, but it sounds like it's a different rule in Israel.
Yeah. No. Israeli people, Jewish people love, courts and stuff like that, and the law. The law is more important than the state. The law is actually the essence of Judaism. Judaism is basically a system of laws, besides being a religious belief, in a deity.
Okay.
It is a system of laws. That's the more important thing. the Mosaic Law, which starts with the Ten Commandments, which are interpreted and elaborated, like with the Talmud, etc., and the Mishnah and the Gemara. So there are books and books and books, of this law, which is one of the, cornerstones of Western, law as well. This is where it comes from. And this Judaic law comes from the Hammurabi Code and from the Egyptian law of the pharaohs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You mean the Ten Commandments, God didn't really write those on stone? Yeah, they got them from Hammurabi?
Well, he couldn't have, because Moses broke the first set of tablets when he got pissed off with the Israelites, they weren't Israelites. They were the Jewish people who had built the golden calf.
Yeah.
And they were turning into worshipers of Baal, this pagan god. Okay,
I found that Moses broke the Ten Commandments.
That's right. And then he went back up the mountain. And he made another set, and he came down with the second set. Okay. Second of all, Moses wrote the first 5 books. And the proof that it was written by a human is that in the Genesis, when it talks about the creation of the universe, and it says that on the first day, the deity created, light, which is the sun. The second day created the earth. But how could the first day have been the first day if the earth had not existed yet? Because the day is considered to be the rotation of the earth, right?
Oh.
So the terms used are terms which are human terms. Theology is human.
Well, I don't have any problem with that. That's fine. Sure.
Okay. So now let's get back to Israel, as it's called.
Okay.
Israel is the name of the Jewish people, actually.
Okay.
It's not the name of a territory. And the Zionists use the term Eretz Yisrael. But Eretz Yisrael was never a Jewish nation state, even under David and Solomon. It was a multinational country. Because even, Solomon had, 300 wives? They weren't all Jewish.
Okay.
So the descendants, of these initial founders of the Israelite kingdom produced, a progeny which were not necessarily Jewish. In fact, the mother of David was a Moabite.
Okay.
Now, you see, the picture becomes, different, when you look into the, precision of the matter. Even Joshua, who is presented, by the Ezra version of the Bible, Torah, he is, presented, in the Torah and its history as having made a peace treaty with the Hittite nation, which was a nation living within the land of Canaan, which became Palestine, which became Israel. So there was an original peace treaty that was followed by the Israelites who lived in a coexistence with the other nations, of whom there were 7, within the same territory that originally was Canaan. And the language that was used was not Hebrew. The common language was Aramaic.
Oh, all right.
So, what we have now as Israel is not a copy of what was Israel before.
Well, I didn't know. Aramaic is what's the connection between Hebrew and Aramaic? Are they sort of the same family of languages, or what's?
Semite languages.
I mean,
yes.
We always hear of Aramaic as what Jesus spoke.
That's right.
So Jesus wasn't Jewish?
Yes, he was Jewish. And all the Jewish people, all the Israelites at that time spoke Aramaic. Hebrew was used for prayers, like Latin is used, in the Catholic Church.
Oh, really?
Yes. And Hebrew doesn't come even from Canaan. Hebrew comes from Iraq, Mesopotamia, the region of Sumar, and the city of Ur, where Abraham originated. Abraham himself was not Jewish, of course, because the Jewish people didn't exist, even though the Zionists referred to Abraham and the covenant with Abraham as the contract, for the ownership of the land of Israel, which doesn't exist as a contract. Now,
okay.
even in the Torah, it says that the covenant with Abraham for residents in the land of Canaan was a welcoming mat. It wasn't a contract, giving possession, in a property sense, of the land. It was a welcoming, like Wa'alana salam in Arabic means you are welcome, with peace. This is based upon the Abrahamic covenant, and it still exists in Islamic and Arabic, folklore. Okay, what does this covenant say? That all the descendants of Abraham are welcome in the land of Canaan forever. Who is the first son of Abraham? Of course, like at that time, inheritance rights were granted to the firstborn son, not the daughter and not the secondborn son, but the firstborn son only, who became the new patriarch. Okay, the firstborn son of Abraham was Ishmael, the father of the Arab people.
Oh, I mean, and that is a current myth that Ishmael was he and his mother were sent out to wander, and he became the head of the Arab nation. Now, but that is just something like, an urban myth or something.
Wait.
I mean, is this current?
There's something missing there. Because Ishmael and his mother Hajar, who was an Egyptian, were sent out, but by whom? Not by Abraham.
By his wife.
Because of the matriarchal privilege. You see, because there's a matriarchy as well, which has control over the internal workings of the family. So, and Hajar was originally her servant.
Right.
So she sent them away because.
Wasn't it Sarah?
Yes, that's right.
Sarah said, "Get out of here."
Yes.
And he had to go along with it.
He had to. Yes. And then a following fact, which exists as well in Torah, which is indicative, is that.
I'm sorry, but I'm not going to let you out of this. What makes you claim that, I mean, I know that I've heard people say this, but what kind of biblical evidence would there be for the claim that Ishmael was the head of the Arab people, the father of the Arab nation?
Because it says in the Torah that Ishmael became the founder of a host of nations. And
Torah says that, and that's pretty good. You got to accept that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Then what followed when Sarah died? Abraham, he bought a tract of land to bury her with a cave. This cave called the Melpalak cave and the surrounding lands. He bought for 400 pieces of silver. Now, if the land was given to Abraham as a possession in a private sense, then why would he have had to have paid for the land in the first place? So this is proof that the land was not given as a possession in a private sense to Abraham, but that the covenant with Abraham was a covenant for a welcome for the Abrahamic clan to reside in that land. So this is further proof that there is no such thing as an Eretz Yisrael, which belongs to the Jewish people alone.
Okay, so all of what you're giving now is the Bundesline, right? You're explaining, no?
That's Judaic. That's the Judaic position. I'm talking to you from my Orthodox education.
Oh.
I went through 7 years of primary school in a Jewish cheder, in Jewish Talmud Torah, together in the evenings while I was going to the Protestant school during the day.
All right.
I went to 2 schools at the same time.
Well, it shows. Okay, sounds good. All right. So I don't know where we are. What's this?
Now, what's happening in Palestine?
Pardon?
What's happening in Palestine is more interesting.
Oh yeah, but okay. So we've covered Israel.
Yeah.
I want to cover a little bit more about Netanyahu. Suppose he gets convicted while he's a president of the country, or what is he, prime minister?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he gets convicted. So what happens? He serves his country. He moves his office to the jail and keeps on running the country from.
No, it's not so easy. No, it's not so easy to consider that matter resolved in that manner. No, because he can delay his court proceedings for another 5 years.
That's why he wants to be reelected, for one thing, I guess.
Yes,
But he's being charged. He can't get out of that, right?
that's right. You
But
know,
he doesn't. Okay.
the attorney general who charged him, Mindelbach, is also a member of his political party.
Really? Okay.
And but law is the law, and it's stronger than the Zionist ideology. It's stronger than the Zionist state. The law is the law in Judaism and in Jewish political culture, and even a prime minister cannot escape the consequences thereof.
Okay.
Now, there is only one thing that can change the deadlock in Israeli politics, and that is if Netanyahu resigns as the head of the Likud party. They choose a new leader, then they have a new coalition, and then Bennett and the others, fragments of the right wing would join in with Likud because many of them oppose a coalition, with the Likud party, precisely because Netanyahu is the head of the coalition. So Netanyahu,
that's a good reason, frankly.
yeah. So and there's been demonstrations against Netanyahu every week, for a year now in his neighborhood. And the last one before the election was, 50,000 people strong. But the media doesn't cover this. The media doesn't cover the Orthodox demonstrations against conscription either. And they're doing civil disobedience, being hosed down, beaten with police sticks and arrested and imprisoned.
Why does the media cover it? Because I thought Israel supposedly is a democracy. You'd think one criterion of being a democracy is that you can get straight answers out of the press.
Yes, well, yes. But, all the newspapers, are private corporations, and they will only cater, to their readership in order to sell their newspapers. And their readership would not accept, the reports such as that which I have given you. I've written reports, from inside Palestine, from a Jewish perspective, which would be most interesting for the readership of Israel. But even Haaretz, liberal Zionist, newspaper that publishes anti-Zionist, articles from Amir Haas and Gideon Levy, they wouldn't accept my articles, even with my qualifications as a doctor of political science. There are limitations, to democracy, even though it's democratic.
Okay, now go on and tell us about Palestine, because we haven't even got to Palestine.
Now, the Palestinian people are really pissed off with the Prime Minister Abbas because, he sort of caters, to Israel's whims. He arrests Palestinians. There's a special police called the Preventive Security Police, which have brown jeeps as opposed to the black jeeps of the Palestinian police, the normal police, civil police. There's a special police force that is financed by the Palestinian Authority to arrest Palestinians who might be a threat to the security of the state of Israel, whether it be against civilians or not. And they could be, political organizers. They could be, eloquent speakers. Whatever Israel considers to be a threat to their security and to the continued military occupation of the West Bank is reported to the Palestinian Authority. They send it to the Defense Security Police, and they go and arrest the Palestinian and put them in a Palestinian prison. Okay? And all the Palestinians know this. And they don't like Abbas for this reason.
I could see why they might not.
Secondly, they got disenchanted with even Yasser Arafat because he signed the Oslo Agreement in which he recognized the existence of the State of Israel, even though the State of Israel did not recognize the existence of the Palestine state. So he gave Israel a big favor and expected, Israel to be generous and recognize the Palestine state, in the 5 years, limit that was assigned for Israel to do so. But Israel never did. So Arafat, people became disenchanted with Arafat as well, and with his party Fatah, which is the party of Abbas. So in the upcoming Palestinian elections, the 22nd of May, seems likely that the Fatah party is going to lose. There's 30 different lists of political formations that are registered now to be candidates in the Palestinian election. 30.
Though, I mean, this is not new. But he's been dead 10 years or 15. So why would they be more disenchanted with Fatah now than they were when he was actually whenever the Oslo Accord occurred?
Well,
if that's what bothers them.
They're not more disenchanted. In fact, they're somewhat less disenchanted because the Fatah party, which controls international diplomacy and all the Palestine embassies throughout the world, recognized or not, has actually succeeded in its diplomatic initiatives in the United Nations and in the International Criminal Court to secure the recognition of the Palestine state now by the recent decision of the International Criminal Court in The Hague, which is independent of the United Nations. Plus all the various, votes in UN General Assembly in the great majority, which, favored Palestine. So all these things, tend to sort of give credence, to Fatah, but that's only on the external, factor. Internally, they're not, accepted as the government of Palestine. Even Hamas accepts.
What is Abbas's party?
Fatah.
So that is, he in effect is, okay, go on.
Okay. Now, externally, like Fatah and Hamas are united. Hamas supports Fatah in the international diplomacy. And Hamas has even come out, with a declaration saying that it's willing to recognize the state of Israel if Israel recognized the state of Palestine. So they're willing to go through with an extrapolation of the Oslo Accords. Mm-hmm. And even they dumped the old charter of 1988, and they have a new charter which removes all the anti-Semitic, nonsense. And they have come out with a charter now which declares their political program to be in opposition to the ideology of Zionism and the Zionist state, but not against the Jewish people. Jewish people are not mentioned now. So they've removed.
What are they asking for if Zionism means a Jewish state? So are they asking for some sort of one state solution or what?
No, they're asking for two-state interim solution with the recognition of the Palestine state, the withdrawal of the Israel military, the negotiations of what to do with the settlers and the Palestinian refugees for reasonable accommodation. This is their program now. There's also the program Fatah. So they have the same program, basically. Now,
it's okay to me.
Yeah. Now,
but I don't think it would sell in Israel, right? You think it would sell? No.
No, but the Israelis don't have a vote in the Palestinian elections.
Right. Yeah, I know. But I mean, the point is, if that is what they're demanding, they're not going to get it.
Well, it's not a matter of what Israel or the Israelis are willing to accept. It's a matter of what they're obliged to accept. Because once they get condemned for human rights violations in the International Criminal Court, that goes to the United Nations Security Council for implementation. And the question of sanctions comes up. And also UN peacekeeping troops could be sent in. And this is all dependent upon the Security Council. And if the International Criminal Court, condemns Israel, then how can the United States, veto such a resolution? It would be a great embarrassment to do so.
Oh, come on. Wow, you're really going off into a never land. I mean, you're thinking about a scenario that I've never even heard of before.
Even the Biden administration currently has set up political relations with the Palestinian Authority, with Abbas. They have donated $15 billion, to Palestine, for, like they do, like for Israel, they commit billions of dollars. Now they're doing the same for Palestine. And they are indicating that they will have a more positive attitude to resolutions, favoring Palestine in the United Nations. This is the Biden administration.
Well, I mean, this is all totally new to me.
And as well,
I've never heard any of this.
They're considering, renewing the financing of the United Nations refugee relief program for the Palestinians as well.
Okay, so what are people in Israel doing? Are they jumping up and down and screaming, or what? Why haven't I heard about this? Because this is, I'm sorry to, I'm almost embarrassed to be so clearly pro-Palestinian. I'm sorry. I should sound neutral, but I really think, how neat, what a great idea. But so that's not very nice of me, but there you go. That's the way I feel.
Yeah, but these things are not, publicized to any great extent, by the media. Not because the media is controlled by Jewish pro-Zionists, because the media is the media in North America, okay, more so in the United States than in Canada, but there is a significant representation of Jewish influence in the media, yes, because Jewish people write a lot. This is, part of a tradition, the writing tradition.
Mm-hmm.
But, half or majority of the media is controlled by Christian owners. And they are pro-Zionist as well, because it fits in, with certain of the Christian doctrine, which calls for restorationism or depersonalizationalism, I think it's called, in the Protestant, Christian theology.
Well, I've heard that it's true of various fundamentalist sects.
That's right.
I think isn't that going too far to say? I mean, I sort of belong to an Anglican church. I'm not very good at it, but I don't hear that kind of talk there at all.
No, Anglicanism is just somewhat of an entity on its own. Yes, but the idea is, like in the Anglican Church itself is the state church of England, of Great Britain, of the United Kingdom, and the Queen is the head of the Anglican Church, and she's the head of state as well. So Anglicanism is the state religion in England, as Lutheranism tends to be in Germany, Calvinism in Holland, and Christianity in general, in the United States of America. That's why it says, "In God we trust," on the American dollar bill, even though that was only added in 1957.
I was just taking Anglicanism as a kind of typical of most mainline Christianity. It's the evangelicals and fundamentalists that I've heard tend to be pro-Zionist.
Yes.
Because they believe in some kind of, there's something coming that's supposed to be when all the dead get raised or something.
Yes. Well, some of the evangelical sects, consider it's necessary to send all the Jewish Americans and Jewish Canadians, to Israel. But that's a minority opinion. Generally, there's a sentiment, amongst the Protestant theological groupings that Israel's a Jewish country and their country is a Christian country, even though there's Jewish people, who live there and now Muslims who live within the country, but that they are expected to acknowledge, that they're living in a Christian country. So, there's sort of a mixed bag of things happening there. But, okay, getting back to Palestine. Palestine has a similar conception of itself in that it considers that it should be a Muslim country and, a Muslim nation state. But they're now confronted, with the Israeli Zionist settlers who are there for both ideological and economic reasons and theological reasons. So it gets complicated. So they're going to have to contend with that. But the Palestinian people, disenchantment with the Fatah party means that in the West Bank, there's a certain, favorable attitude towards Hamas, which is considered to be more militant, has stood up to the Zionist state and has had some success in doing so. But in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians are disenchanted with the Hamas government because their steadfastness and retaliation against attacks by Israel have resulted in further attacks by Israel. So they're less likely to vote for Hamas, more likely to vote for Fatah. So who knows what's going to happen, really? But, there's also an independence list. And then there's a new list being set up, by the political prisoner, Marwan Burgati, who has allied himself with a nephew of Arafat to set up a new political formation that is running against Fatah. And they may actually win the election because Marwan Barghouti is favored to be
So what would happen?
Well, okay. What happened the first time in 2006 when there was the first election? This was the first democratic election in an Arab country, the Palestine election of 2006. And there, both sides, they refused to accept the results of the election because Hamas won. Israel refused to accept those election results. Fatah refused to accept the election result. And so Palestine split. Hamas kept Gaza and Fatah kept the West Bank. And so there was no unified government. There were two governments of Palestine, Palestinian Authority and the independent Palestinian government.
Would that, if they all lined up on the same party this time, I gather that's a possibility, then would they get back together again? Gaza and the West Bank, would they
Yes. Yeah, they would.
Yeah.
Okay. And then they would negotiate with Israel to follow through on the Oslo Accords to allow some sort of a transportation system between Gaza and the West Bank.
Well, this sounds kind of pleasant. I mean, it sounds like maybe there's something to look forward to here.
Except that the Likud government of Netanyahu has refused to negotiate with the Palestine government to further the Oslo Accords because they are now insisting on an extra condition, which was not part of the Oslo Accords. They're insisting that the Palestine government recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Okay? Which it was never part of the previous, constitutional apparatus, which was not part of the Oslo Agreement.
Yeah.
And if it did recognize that, then it could actually empower the Israel government with a majority to expel the Palestinian population or to cede those territories and say that they're now part of Palestine and that the Palestinians living there no longer have a vote.
So that's still just Netanyahu, right?
Yeah.
If Netanyahu's out, will that doctrine or that demand also go with him? Or will the next guy also say, you've got to deal with us, you've got to recognize Israel as a Jewish state?
No, that's Netanyahu.
That's just Netanyahu. Well, good. That's another reason to give him the boot.
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds very encouraging, although I never heard anybody else say there's anything encouraging going on in that wretched place. But anyway.
What's encouraging is that there's an election taking place finally.
Well, okay.
Even though, Abbas, his mandate to be prime minister expired long, long ago.
Okay. All right.
But an election is happening. Presidential election is going to be happening. So there's going to be a big change happening. The Palestinians are getting it together. And the Israelis are falling apart.
Right. Okay, we used up our time and this has been fun. Yeah, I appreciate this. So yes. I'm much smarter than I was half an hour ago. Yeah, appreciate that. Okay, take care. And I hope you get to go back to where you want to be. Bless your heart. Thank you so much. Been real fun. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.